Welcome to the Healthcare IT Today CIO podcast. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today, and I'm excited to bring you the most practical healthcare CIO insights and perspectives. We know your job is challenging, and we want to help you be more successful. And our guest today is Dr. Avi Sharma. He's a radiologist and director of AI at Jefferson Einstein. Welcome, Avi.
Thank you, John. Appreciate you taking the time and having me here.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about some of the approaches to AI that you're doing there at Jefferson Einstein. But before we go there, tell us a little bit about yourself and Jefferson Einstein.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm a radiologist. My subspecialty is in body imaging. I'm also the director of AI, and that is a unique title, and I don't think many hold it. And I can talk a little bit more about it. But ultimately, as the director of AI, I manage and deploy our solutions within our radiology practice. And a lot is entailed with that. That's me collaborating with our vendors, securing and curating the ones that we want to deploy, working with their IT and security team to make sure that they're properly implemented, and then teaching our radiologists about the products that we have, and then measuring their impact, ultimately seeing are they worth the investment.
Nice. Well, I think, everyone's trying to figure out how to navigate this AI world. Like, there's opportunity, there's risk, there's all sorts of things going on. So let's dive into some of those things. The first one, I'd love to hear what you think. Like, how should someone like yourself approach being an AI champion in your organization? I assume you're a champion, otherwise you can't be called director of AI, right? Is that
And it's a great question, and I'll give a little bit of context about my background and how I came into the role. So through my training, and especially through my early years, I saw that AI was on the horizon, and as a radiologist, we have been one of the forefront leaders of implementing AI into clinical practice. So knowing that this is something that was going to be part of my everyday life for the rest of my career, I was very cognizant of the fact that you essentially need clinician champions to help other clinicians learn about its potential, its limitations, so that the tool is best leveraged. We can give countless examples of where new tools and whistles are implemented or thrown at us, but no one's really done the due diligence on making sure it was worthwhile, and two, teaching the users about it. And that's ultimately lends into my imaging informatics background. That's something that, with the different people I've met along the way, the people who are passionate about technology and the processes that are necessary to implement it, AI falls into that umbrella. So it's another process and technology that needs to be properly implemented and taught to our radiologists. So coming back to how I ended up into this role, so I was very cognizant after doing an imaging informatics fellowship that I needed to find the right group and practice setting in order to leverage these skills. And it wasn't easy. This is before ChatGPT had made AI a very colloquial term in our everyday conversation. But it was me going to practice and saying, hey, AI is here and it's here to stay. You should really invest your time and energy with this. I got a lot of crickets. I didn't get a lot of
business as usual is fine? I don't need
yeah,
that.
and the thing is that AI in its current state is another line item in your budget, right? So there's so many other competing interests when with limited resources. So I get it. But I eventually came across Jefferson Einstein, where my chair, Dr. Ryan Lee, was already a thought leader in the AI radiology space, and him and I got into a very lengthy conversation about the potential of AI and where we see it going. And ultimately, at the chair, he's just like, I don't have enough bandwidth to do this all myself. So him and I curated this role as a director of AI, where the roles and responsibilities I alluded to earlier is a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis, because it's not about just getting AI and calling it a day. There's a lot of maintenance and reinforcement that's necessary to make sure that it's working well for us.
Hmm. It's not just the easy button, huh? It takes some. I mean, we should have learned this from EHR, right? Like, you don't
I'm
just
with
set
you.
it and forget it.
And the thing is, though, it's funny because you've heard these statements, and it's like, especially with radiologists, they say like those radiologists who use AI will replace the ones that don't. And
Right.
it's like a calling card or bat signal, if you will, where everyone needs to be more cognizant about AI. And it's the same way where we've had multiple like sort of watershed moments. I mean, going from film to digital, that I'm sure terrified quite a number of folks when we eventually had to make that transition. And the concept of using a computer read imaging. And now we've gone to through COVID, where reading remotely and virtually is omnipresent. So ultimately, AI is in that same dynamic phase where people are slowly migrating and being bought into it.
Mhm. And there's a couple of people still using film, but yeah, you're right. We're gonna have that. That's a good comparison, I think. But how do you approach like AI governance? Because I think that's a really important area of this. Because if you're going to be a trusted champion, you can't just be throwing every single AI thing at them. So how are you all approaching the governance of this AI?
It's a great question. And ultimately, I will say that if you ask anyone this question, if they say they're doing a fantastic job at it, they might be blowing smoke at you
We're
because
still figuring it out. I'd say the most common answers I get is either we created an AI committee to evaluate it, or we already have a governance committee, we're using them. That's the two answers I've gotten so far.
well, honestly, it's actually a reasonable answer. And to be quite honest, AI in and of itself, while it deserves its own merit and recognition, it's like with any new process and it requires integration. So say it be AI or something else, it's good that it's going through whatever has already been cemented as part of their workflow and not trying to reinvent the wheel, which ultimately I think is a reasonable thing to do. But I think another important aspect of it all is bringing clinicians to the table, or namely the end users of the product, because I think that's where there ends up being a little bit of a disconnect where there may be people at the top that are a little bit more removed from what day-to-day practice could look like with AI. And ultimately, you can get some eye-widening experiences that make you think it's going to be impactful, and then lo and behold, it's not really moving the needle. So for us, our governance committee, and especially at Jefferson Health, we're going through the necessary growing pains and processes of understanding whether it's the technical risk, the legal risk, and understanding the model and monitoring aspect of it all. But we are in the evolutionary phase of developing a curated system to triage and identify companies and vendors and technology that may be useful. They go through our different steering committees to determine if they are a good fit. And ultimately, we learn by hearing stories from other hospital systems that have used the product and what the impact has been. But for us in the early goings, and this is me coming back to just describing the Jefferson Einstein story, it was a
Uh-huh.
little bit more of the wild, wild west at the beginning because AI technology was new. And so it was being a little bit more stringent and having one-on-one conversations with the vendors themselves, learning about their nuances. Because in the early stages, they hadn't deployed quite often and they didn't have a lot of customers. So it was taking a big bet and intelligent risk with them. But now across the stage, I mean, with all these different healthcare systems, this governance committee is a necessary tool in everyone's tool belt to make sure that you're ensuring that the AI is, again, being above board, maintaining PHI and security, and then, of course, making an impact in the clinical workflow.
Yeah. I mean, your comments about getting the doctors involved feel like Groundhog Day a little bit, right? I mean, that was a lesson we learned in the HR world as well, that if you involve the doctors and they felt like they were part of the selection process, then they had some buy-in about making it a success, right? I mean, this is over and over. We learned that, and of course, the challenge still remains that doctors don't want to be involved. What do you do to kind of get those doctors involved, because some of them just don't want to. Is it just focusing on the right ones, or how, what tricks or tips do you have to get the doctors involved?
No, it's a great point and something where when I going into this role, I was hopeful that I would achieve 100% usage and compliance with the tool. And then I
um,
realized that you can reach for the stars, land in the clouds when it really comes to actually achieving metrics. But ultimately, what it all came down to is just understanding, okay, there's like buckets of people that where you can actually see if they can make an impact. You have one end of the spectrum at 25% who are the never users. They're already very cemented in the way they do things. There's just no way, data or convincing arguments you can give them to change their mind. And then you have the other 25%, they're the super users. Now, those that are like-minded like yourself that are just innovators by heart. They want the latest iPhone model. They want, a new electric vehicle, some new technology. And then you have the middle 50% where, with enough encouragement, nurturing, and data to prove that it's worth the change in their workflow, those are the people that you're really focusing your time and attention on, and accepting that, you're never going to achieve 100% when it comes to any tool. So for me, and I can say this, clinicians are very data-driven people. Our lives were spent, over a decade in education and learning the numbers and learning the facts. So for me, it's about proving the data in a real life application. So a lot of the metrics and studies that I do is determining what was the impact pre-AI and post-AI. And I can give a story about an example that ended up resonating
Yeah,
with our.
that'd be great.
So there's one solution that was a generative AI tool that helped the radiologist in building their impression.
Okay.
And conceptually, it's just taking the findings that you had said in the body of the report and then curating it and giving you a enumerated, bulleted version of how you would typically say things, because it learns as you dictate. And then, of course, integrates the recommendations by the national guidelines in order to make sure that you're not missing any of the findings that you left in the report. So we were able to capture some of our radiologists that, once the tool was deployed, didn't use it for a couple months, but eventually, heard from their colleagues about the product and they started using it. So now I had some pre-data and some post-data with the tool. And I ended up looking at the data of one of our well-known colleagues, who's a very extremely fast radiologist as it was already. Looked at their data, and I was able to prove that they were signing off reports 25% faster. They were spending less time. They were increasing the volume of studies that they were doing. And then I spoke to them and they said, yeah, I'm spending less of my time and energy on fine-tuning the impression because it's spell checking for me, grammatically correct, making sure I'm giving the appropriate recommendations, and taking their data and then packaging it into a very digestible way. I brought it to one of our monthly staff meetings, showed other radiologists, and it was a very pleasant, positive feedback loop, the domino effect that I had, because then I had more new users with pre-data and post-data, and it's rinse and repeat, which is an exciting endeavor for me to start witnessing that number trickle up and seeing more people use the product.
Yeah, what a great story. That's awesome. Talk to us about integration. Are you okay with AI solutions that don't integrate, or do you really just need them to integrate? How are you approaching that kind of integration versus kind of standalone AI?
Yeah, the integration point of it, and there's multiple facets to it. So when you say integration, to me as a radiologist, I have a set system that I use to do all of my work. And anything that diverts my eyes away from the images or from my PAC system where I view the images is by and large a hindrance to my day-to-day workflow, right? So
Then why do you have four monitors? That the pack
well,
system is on four monitors. Is
more
that?
images the better. I mean, for me, a radiologist, I'm sure I can get into stacking arguments of how many different monitors they have, but
Yeah. Sorry to
ultimately,
interrupt. Go ahead.
it's all the different widgets and tools that you think about. And ultimately, when you have a standalone product that prompts you to open up a new web page or something that's separate from your existing system, you lose people because people get buried with tabs all the time, and it's very cumbersome to be able to navigate all the findings. And ultimately, you want them to be able to be seen within your system, and then of course transcribed into your report the findings you'd like to see. So the integration component of it all, especially in the radiology workflow, is truly understanding not just the technology, but how embedded can you be into our workflow? And that's something I press vendors about all the time, because it's like you can have the shiniest tool in the toolbox, but if I have to click 10 times to get there, you've already lost me. So that aspect of it is a constant conversation I have with the vendors. Now, in regards to integration with our system at large, and I guess I'm transitioning the conversation more into the IT security side of things.
Sure.
That has been another unique sort of evolutionary process where initially folks would go through you know, the cyclical process of going through security and IT for a specific solution, but that gets exhausting, right? You're getting legal involved, you're getting security involved, you're checking your IT resources. To do that for every single point solution, that gets to become a headache. But as you might expect, and this is something especially in the radiology world, is the enterprise platform, where conceptually you have one main app store, if you will, or main platform where now you can just flip light switches on with different solutions, so you don't have to go through the same security and IT hangups, because you've ultimately established it with one main deliverer of the solutions, and then you can just add and subtract solutions as need be. So that integration concept, I think, has been evolving for us, especially because we've had some partners in the past, and they started off at point solutions, and now they've have an entire platform where they can now add on other third-party solutions. So they've already achieved the integration conversation. They're already part of our workflow, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel again.
I mean, I think it's interesting because the integration or not, in some ways, almost becomes a filter for you amongst all the AI vendors that are out there. Yeah, but how do you look at kind of choosing which AI vendors you're gonna test out, you're gonna implement, et cetera? There's so many in this space. I think it's a struggle that we all are facing. I don't think it's probably new for you either, right? Everyone's like, there's so much happening. How do I know who's real and who's fake? How do I know who's integrated, who's not? How do I know who's making an impact, who could make an impact, but we don't know? Like, how do you kind of vet the different AI vendors?
That's a great question, and it's totally valid because you end up going through option paralysis. There's so many solutions out there, and you can start getting into the minutia of like, oh, this is marginally better than the next one. Which one would make the most impact? And I totally get it. It's not fun to need to comb through the weeds, but ultimately, it's about understanding first and foremost, we're at this point now that once a solution has an established group of customers or deployments, and they've achieved the necessary metrics, you are quite often talking to your peers at other institutions and asking them how their experiences have been, because word of mouth goes a really long way with the AI solutions. I will say you hear news articles every now and then, new FDA cleared solution coming out for this and this and that, and while it's a eye-catching headline, there's a lot more that needs to be asked rather than just achieving FDA clearance, because I think that's one of many steps that you need to start asking about. Okay, well, I'm glad you have an FDA cleared solution, aka it can be used on patients, but walk me through how you deploy this product. Have you worked with our packs? Have you worked with our reporting software? And those questions in and of itself start combing the crowd, and you start getting people that are just like, oh, well, we've never deployed via your packs. And that's ultimately would be a signal to you to be like, well, is this juice worth the squeeze? Do I want to partake with this vendor? So we do a lot of combing in that industry. And one of our more legacy partnerships that we've had was with ADOC, which is a pretty big company within the radiology AI space. And they were actually an early partner with us, where they only had a few point solutions, and we took the big bet to say, hey, why don't we create like a collaborative arrangement where we learn from each other? We deploy your solution, we'll be very candid with our feedback, and then you accordingly will tell, well, you can tell us like what potential tools or features you may be to add or subtract. And that has been a very mutually beneficial relationship, because we feel like we're invested in nurturing the appropriate AI to help our fellow colleagues, because you're co-developing solutions that end up making it, globally, nationwide, and eventually globally. And that constructive process is what eventually transitioned that company itself's mission, not just to be a point solution vendor, but rather an enterprise platform. And from there, they're not just helping radiologists, but now they're attempting to helping other subspecialties and making an impact there. So seeing that growth and just evolution in the company, it's like, okay, well, we were part of those grassroots stages, and it's a warm welcome feeling to know that you're making that impact.
Yeah. I think it's such a struggle though for most in this space, because you're like, one, you want to pick the right pony, right? For lack of a better phrase, right? You're like, who is going to be the winner? Because you want to choose the platform that will win and have all of the solutions that you need. And then on the other hand, you also, so you wanted to pick the right winner, but you also don't want to pick, you don't want to miss out on benefits that you could have if you implemented them, even if it's a bit of a point solution. But I feel like most enterprises are afraid of that best of breed approach, and they just want the integrated. And if we miss out, we miss out. Any thoughts on how to kind of do that, or is it just due diligence and doing the hard work of figuring it out?
Yeah, ultimately everyone has to do their own respective due diligence and understanding how their clinicians operate, because the way I practice could be ultimately very different than another geographic area, even within the States. And ultimately, it's about understanding that these AI companies are businesses at their core, right? They're going to sell you the moon and really convince you that they can make an impact. But again, it's about speaking with your own respective groups and who the people would be that would be the most benefited from the product, and even doing your own validation of the product. That's something that we do, where any solution goes through a testing validation phase of saying, okay, well, you've built this product in a vacuum on a cohort of training data that may come internationally or be from a different geographic area. While you have these performance metrics that you're touting here, let's prove it on our local population to see if it translates well, to make sure that this model doesn't break and it is actually proving an ROI for us. And that, again, due diligence process, it's necessary as part of the governance committee to make sure that you're not buying something and then realizing that, it's a load of junk, where it works on day one and then you're, fast forward a couple months or a year and you're just like, no one finds it reliable, so ultimately we just keep it on their desktop. We don't ultimately use it, which would be the worst case scenario, right? I mean, ultimately, especially with software, you want to make sure that it's continually making an impact. But it is part of it. And again, one thing that I'll say just at large with AI solutions, and maybe I'm speaking more so for radiology, is that being an AI champion, it's about understanding how your colleagues practice, but two, reading in between the lines at the conferences and the demos that you get and all the bells and whistles, and ultimately seeing from other colleagues how they've responded to the product, I think goes a long way. So like, keep conversation in comms channels open, and then also recognize and see which companies are receptive to feedback. I think ultimately, you say that they're the one, are they a one-trick pony, or like the best in class? If they're defensive about what they're building and they're not like open to hearing ways in which they can iterate on their product and make it better, maybe they're not the best partner ultimately, because anyone who thinks they have something that's perfect right now is not going to be perfect forever, right? It's got to stay dynamic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's about the partnership, because it is all moving so quickly. So who's going to be a good partner long term? That's a really interesting point. Well, we always like to wrap up these episodes with a little career discussion. So tell us, for someone who would like to work in AI, what career advice would you give them?
It's a good question, and what I'll say is, especially with the role that I have now, don't settle your expectations to what the status quo is when finding these new roles, especially with AI. And if you truly have a passionate interest in it, I am certain that you either can find like-minded colleagues, or you can be the steward at your respective institution to take that role and initiative and be your AI champion, because there is no resident expert with AI. And ultimately, if you're willing to go through the growing pains, onerous process of learning where AI can make an impact, you will have learned a lot through the process, and ultimately can share that wisdom with your colleagues. So I say, dig in, just take the leap, network at conferences. AI is a hot buzz topic everywhere now, so don't have to look too far to find people that want to talk about AI. And once you learn more, just bring it back to your practice and see what works.
Yeah. That's great advice. And that's how you learn, right? Is by doing. I think that's the best lesson there. We saw that in a lot of different ways as tech's evolved, right? The first person using a desktop computer probably was the one that ended up training, right? That's because there wasn't someone that knew how to do it before.
And sort of emphasize, it's worth it. I mean, you're going to pay it forward ultimately. Whatever you learn, someone else somewhere may have a similar, or may end up going through a similar issue. And by sharing your wisdom and sentiments on it, like, it is worth it. So don't hesitate in getting into the space.
Awesome. Avi, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking time to sit down with us to talk AI and share some of your experiences at Jefferson Einstein. And I think we learned a lot in this time, so appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com, or search for the CIO podcast by Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcasting application. Thanks, Avi.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.